Good morning, everyone. It's Jenni from Baboon Matters, and today I've got with me my trustee Elisa Galgut and Ryno from Baboon Management Western Cape.
That's correct.
And we are going to have a little discussion about the future of our baboons, because there's been so much talk and concern about these proposed action plans. So we know that there's a baboon strategic management plan, and now there's this action plan. Ryno, what are your biggest concerns for our peninsula baboons?
Well, Jenni, my biggest concern is what does the future hold for our peninsula baboons? If you look at the future, you must obviously look at history. Now, we've had a science-based 15-year management of baboons that rendered no baboon-proof bins, no strategic fencing, no law enforcement being enforced. In other words, the human element has never been managed. And as a consequence now, it seems that they want to remove 117 baboons off the peninsula. So in the absence of these mitigating strategies that the researchers has identified for our authorities, what does the future hold for our baboons? Are these mitigating strategies going to be implemented? Or are they going to come with another hard reset 2 years from now for other troops? And then, is it ethical of them not to implement their strategies? And that's a question that Elisa can assist us with.
Well, I mean, I think the answer is very clear, that it's clearly not ethical not to implement the very strategies that you yourself have indicated are necessary to keep the baboons from being harmed, to keep the baboons from being killed. And then on top of that, to kill the baboons after not having implemented the very mitigation strategies that you've identified. Because one of the things that you're doing when you identify mitigating strategies is you're saying, look, if we put in place these various things, this is going to prevent the baboons from coming into urban areas, and it's therefore going to prevent the baboons from being harmed in the various ways that they are harmed when they come into urban areas. So you know what the implications of not implementing the mitigation strategies are. So by refusing to do that, you're essentially acting in a way that's not only contrary to reason, but contrary to the very ethical guidelines that you yourself have set up as being appropriate. So it's both irrational and unethical.
But Elisa, for the last 25 years, they haven't given any cognizance or any consideration to the ethical aspects. I know you've been saying for ages, what about the ethics? And when they had their panel discussion recently, I know that we at Baboon Matters and various others all requested that there should be ethical representation. So why do you think they have ignored the ethical side for so long? I mean, they've killed nearly 80 baboons under their management guidelines. So they really have ignored it. And now suddenly there's this huge focus on the welfare. And now after 25 years, ethics is coming in.
I mean, I think one of the reasons is a kind of historical reason with respect to how people view conservation. So people just view conservation as looking at the numbers of the species. How many baboons are there? What is the value of the baboons to biodiversity? So, for example, I think Ryno pointed this out. When people talk about the importance of the baboons, they say, oh, they're important for tourism, they're important for the dispersal of seeds and so on. They never think of the baboons as individuals in their own right. And I think that's just been a way that animals have been seen in South Africa for centuries. And I think that very old-fashioned way of looking at animals as mere things, in a way. I mean, animals are certainly not persons in law, but I think conservation authorities think about conservation, about the species and not the individual. So they don't think about the individuals as having interests. It's just not on their radar. And I mean, it was worrying because at that expert panel that they had, that the JTT set up recently, with that panel of many experts to give them advice about what to do with the baboons, one of the experts mentioned the importance of ethics, and the JTT's response was, we're not legally obliged to do an ethical review. And that just struck me as quite an acknowledgement, actually, because what they were saying was that, well, if we're not legally obliged to do it, then why should we? But if you do take ethics seriously, then you should set yourself up the highest standard of ethics, because why wouldn't you want to? I also think there's a lack of understanding about what ethics means, because they talk about humane treatment of baboons, but they don't realize that when you talk about the humane treatment of a being, you've already conceded that that being has interests. But they don't realize the implications of their own views about what it means to treat a being humanely. They just think it means to try and prevent the animal from a certain kind of suffering, namely from suffering a particular death, if we can prevent, if we can euthanize it, for example. That's pretty much where the humane treatment of baboons comes in.
But just in the values, Ryno, I'd really love you to talk about the value of the baboons, because you've done a lot of research recently, and it's not just the economic value, there's a whole lot more to it. Would you like to speak to that?
Yes, like Elisa said, seed dispersal, good for tourism, great for people to obtain their qualifications by conducting research of baboons. But even more for me, and I did some research on this, I mean, more than 300 baboons were used for research at the cardiac division in Cape Town for heart transplants. Those 300 baboons has caused 537 people's lives to be saved. Now, this is the animal that we don't want to implement mitigating strategies for, that has saved 437 lives.
Yeah.
That without them, there wouldn't have been a heart transplant. And it seems that is not taken into account when these decisions are made. Further than that, you must remember, Jenni, that the non-implementation of mitigating strategies is a conscious election not to implement. It's not a situation where they turn around and say, well, this year we might not have budget, or next year we might not have budget, and that's why we can't implement. It's a conscious election not to implement. In other words, not to look after the baboon's interest. And it's a conscious election to kill and remove. And how they marry those two with ethics, I don't know.
But they're going against themselves in so many ways, because they've said that this is a science-based project for the past 25 years. There's scientists who, as you said, obtained their PhDs and their masters and their postgraduates, studying the baboons, have endorsed these mitigation strategies for the past 25 years, but they haven't been implemented. And each step along the way, like when they introduced pain aversion, which is something I'd really love you to speak to, Elisa, but when they introduced pain aversion through the use of paintball guns, in my opinion, what that did was it said to the unintended consequence was the man in the street was, well, you don't have to worry about doing anything now, just get a gun and shoot the baboons. But if it's science-based, surely their scientists would have been looking at this and saying, but it's not working. We need to do the things we suggested. So a couple of questions for you, introducing pain aversion and not implementing the mitigation, and it's supposed to be science-based, how does it all hang together?
Yeah, I mean, there's a great worry about the science, the evidence base with regard to baboon management, because on the one hand, as Ryno has pointed out, for the past 25 years, we've been having scientists say we need to do these mitigating strategies, and they haven't implemented them. And the strategies that they have implemented, particularly the pain aversion, has not been scientifically endorsed.
Yeah.
I specifically asked for the scientific papers, the published scientific papers that supported the use of paintball guns, and I have not received any such papers. I've asked several people now if they can refer me to the literature, with no success. And also, what is interesting about the use of pain aversion is so pain aversion techniques are a specific psychological behavioral strategy that you use, and it was developed in cognitive psychology. If you want to increase a certain kind of behavior or decrease a certain behavior. They didn't have a single behaviorist or psychologist on their panel, right? Because normally these aversion techniques or tactics are used in constrained environments. And so that an individual can know, if I do X, this is going to be the response. But now you've got an environment that is very wide. The baboons are engaging in all sorts of different behaviors. There are all sorts of different attractants. From a scientific perspective, it's very difficult for the baboons to know, why am I being paintballed? Yeah. So I would like to see the evidence for the use of paintballs. So there's a worry that, I mean, to my mind, what it speaks to is just a lack of will, because the authorities can get the public to change the behavior. I mean, in my article, I pointed out that during the drought, was it 2018, 2019, Cape Townians had the best record for water conservation worldwide. We got an award for it. We can change our behavior because everybody was on board, and the authorities went to a great extent to make sure that we did the right thing in order to prevent disaster. So why aren't they doing that with the baboons? We're not incapable of cleaning up our waste. I mean, that is the most basic thing. And yet we can't seem to get it right.
So Ryno, we have the baboons who have a value. We have the science behind it. I mean, what do you think the future holds? Let's just circle back to that question. I mean, what do you think the future holds for?
Well, we've had various management plans over the last 25 years. All of those management plans provide for the same mitigating strategies. Even the latest one that was adopted 2 years ago. So, Jenny, we're 2 years down the line. We still don't have a baboon-proof bin. Still law enforcement are not being enforced. Still there's no strategic fences up. However, they still kill baboons. They still remove baboons. They want to remove 170 now. So I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if there is even a future for our baboons. And that is what's concerning me. You will recall we brought a court application, and in the court order, the agreed court order, there's recordal stating that the authorities accepts responsibility for baboon management, number one. Number two, that they will implement the BSMP, which provides for all of these mitigating strategies. It hasn't been implemented yet. We're 2 years down the line. So what does the future hold for our baboons? They might very well come back with another hard reset 2 years from now. It seems that baboons are just not important enough.
And yet to the general public they are, because when we ran our campaign, No to Killing, Yes to Solutions, we had an amazing response to the protest. We had an amazing response on social media. A huge number of people were sending emails to the authorities. So even the most frustrated person was saying, look, we don't want these animals killed. So in the face of all of that, the authorities seem to want one thing and the general public seems to want something else. So it does seem to be a bit of a battle of wills at the moment, with the baboons stuck in the middle. And it feels to me that the baboons don't even know that they're doing anything wrong, because they're just going about being baboons. And the authorities are saying that the general public will get over it if they remove 4 troops of animals. Do you think that the public's going to forgive them?
Well, I certainly hope not. I suspect that you're right, and that suspicion worries me, because that's an incredibly cynical view of the authorities' behavior. If they're just sort of playing for time, they think, let's just, we'll get rid of the baboons, and in a year's time, no one's going to say anything, no one's going to care. I mean, one wonders if that has been their strategy all along, to kind of weather the various court cases, to weather the unhappiness from the public, to weather all the activists and so on, but whether it's been their plan all along to get rid of the baboons, because once the baboons are gone, they won't have to worry anymore. They won't have strategies to implement. If that is the case, and I really hope it's not, that would be dereliction of duty of the most egregious kind. It would be a form of corruption, actually, akin to the greatest corruption that is happening in this country, because it's So I hope that cynical view is the wrong one.
Jenny, just on that, even more concerning, and we've had this discussion many a time in the past, is that if the authorities adhere to their own documents, enforce their own legislation, stick to the letter of the law, if they do what they say they're going to do, what they say in their documents they are going to do, what they've represented to the public they're going to do, no one can point a finger at them.
Exactly.
And this is the problem. The problem is that in the last 25 years, there's been so many management plans where all of these mitigating strategies has been identified, and the public has been told, this is what we are going to do. But then they just don't do it, with no consequence. Not enforcement of legislation. I mean, where have you ever heard that an authority advised the public, we're going to enforce legislation, we're going to enforce the waste bylaw, and then just doesn't do it and kill baboons on the back of that?
And the thing is, I think that in the absence of them doing anything, that sets up the public very well, neighbor against neighbor, group against group. We hear all of these labels, the haters versus the bunny huggers and the greenies. And because there's an absence of leadership, nobody's actually coming forward with a solid plan. And as you said, if they all just did what they say they're going to do, we wouldn't have anything to be fighting about,
In essence, of all the things that they said they're going to do, they've done nothing. Yeah. There's a ranger program that was funded by ratepayers, and then there's killing and removal. All the rest of the things, and what is interesting, the rest of the strategies that's left all relates to managing the human element.
Yeah.
Why are they not managing the human element? It is the human element that's complaining.
Exactly.
Why don't they manage the human element? Or must the baboons accept the responsibility for the behavior of the human element, and then also pay the price for such behavior? Because that is what's currently happening.
That's exactly what's happening. And I come back to, the baboons are just being baboons. So the baboons don't think we are breaking and entering into somebody's house. The baboons don't think they're doing anything different than being baboons, yet they're being punished, they're being shot at. And not only by paintball guns. I mean, I was horrified to hear the other day that one of the Scarborough baboons had 117 pellets. 117 pellets on her body. So the pain aversion doesn't work. Surely that much is clear. And yet they're not managing the humans. No humans are prosecuted for shooting these animals.
In Capri, there's this new situation now, and the service provider has reported on it. I don't know if anything is done about it. I'm unaware that anything has been done about it, of people walking the streets with pellet guns. There's kids with knives out, and when you ask them, what are you doing? They said, we're going hunting baboons. I mean, that is what's happening in an urban area. And the reason for that is because there's no law enforcement in respect of waste or in respect of animals. There's no enforcement of the ordinance. And all the while, these authorities will tell you, but we are enforcing it. But that will not be the situation on the ground if they were enforcing it.
But the thing I feel, to circle back to where we started this conversation, is at the moment they're putting a lot of gloss on this idea of, we're so worried about the welfare, we're now worried about the ethics. We've been pointing out for years now the hair loss of various of the animals, where they literally are completely bald. And we have been pointing out the death rates of these animals. We've been pointing out all sorts of things. And now, after 25 years, there's this concern for the welfare and concern for the ethics, and it doesn't feel very genuine.
Well, I think it is a cynical concern, because their solution is to then say, well, we need to kill the baboons. Right? I mean, that article by Esme Beamish said as much. He said it's better to kill the baboons humanely than inhumanely. So the concern about the welfare hasn't been to actually help the baboons. It's been to kill the baboons more humanely. But authorities seem to forget that death is a harm. That's another thing that seems to be completely forgotten if you're doing ethics. It's not just how an animal dies, that's a harm to it. It's the fact that it dies is a harm. So,
It's also the excuse is nonsensical, because your mitigating strategies has been researched, identified and adopted specifically to address welfare concerns, baboon-human conflict, which creates welfare concerns. They haven't implemented any of the mitigating strategies. Now, 25 years down the line, they come and say, well, we're now concerned about the welfare of baboons. How can that ever be? How can that ever be that you are now concerned about the welfare of baboons when it was science-based, the previous management, when you've identified the mitigating strategies to address these welfare concerns, and now you want to remove them or kill them or remove them, translocate them on the back of the issues that must address the welfare concerns that hasn't been implemented.
Mm-hmm. And the thing that strikes me, the biggest anomaly of it all is that whether you like baboons or don't like baboons, we all essentially want the same thing for the baboons. We want them living out their best lives in natural spaces. I think that a lot of people who feel frustration now, it's because they see the baboons in their homes, on their properties every single day. And we all acknowledge that the baboons can cause damage to property. So they don't want the baboons in their urban areas or their properties, neither do we. We want the baboons living their best, safest lives in natural areas. But by doing nothing, the authorities have very cleverly set us at each other's throats. And they do nothing. So
I think it's a narrative that the people that don't like baboons need to adapt or adopt. That narrative relates to, if the authorities has implemented all these mitigating strategies, the baboons will be living their lives in their natural spaces and they will not be in the urban area. Whether we don't want baboons in the urban area because all the dangers of the urban area is what's causing the harm. And the mitigating strategies are there to keep them out of the urban area. And if the people that don't like baboons realize that, they would realize it's not activists, it's not non-profit organizations, it's not welfare groups, it's actually the authorities that is not doing what they said they're going to do and misrepresenting their management plans by saying, this is what we're going to do, and then they don't do it.
So I want to ask you a question, Jen, because you said something earlier about baboons are just being baboons.
yeah.
And there's this narrative going around that the behavior of baboons has somehow worsened, that some baboons are problematic, and we need to, this notion of this use of the word hard reset, which to me just sounds, I'm sorry, it just sounds like nonsense. It just sounds like an excuse for saying, we just got to do this drastic thing, but don't worry, after we do this terribly drastic thing that we absolutely have to do, everything is going to be fine after that. And of course, there's absolutely no evidence that that is the case. But just to get back to this narrative about the baboons' behavior as becoming worse, is that the case, or is it just baboons being baboons?
Look, I'm of the view that it's baboons being baboons. And when we speak to Dr. Dave Gaynor on this issue, he is also of the view that, like in Kommetjie, that was how this whole project started. In Kommetjie in the 1990s, baboons were coming into houses every single day. And that was why they were looking, they initially in those days killed the entire troop. And that's what started the whole process to get better management, better ideals in place. And now we're back at looking at removing whole troops. But as Dr. Gaynor points out, baboons were going into homes. They were taking food from people. So baboons take food from each other. The more dominant baboons will take food from the less dominant baboons. They don't view it as anything different. And so what I find interesting is that we're measuring baboons by human standards. He's aggressive. But in the baboon way of world, if you've got food and somebody bigger and stronger than you wants to take it, they do. And I just wish as well that people would get it into their minds that baboons don't share food. So as a human being, you think, you feel sorry for them, you want to feed them. It's the worst thing you can possibly do because in essence, you're saying, you're stronger than me, you're better than me. And baboons don't think like, it's the worst thing you can possibly do is feed baboons. But again, I think that we're measuring them by human standards and then wanting them to live their best lives. And for baboons, it must be enormously confusing.
Jenny, it's not new and novel with regards to baboons stealing food from each other, going into houses. There's that article in 1960s that's at the Simonstown Museum, published it, of this lady that stayed on the mountainside of Simonstown, where she records baboons came into their house, baboons played with the kids, baboons were naughty. And that's the 1960s. Yeah. This is not new and novel. This is not something that just occurred. However, the management of killing one baboon to teach the other ones a lesson not to come into town is an utter failure. And we've seen it with the waterfall troop, for instance. Babies and females that comes into town because they're not being managed and the attractants are still available.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? Is that the food has been produced for the baboons every single day and laid out for them very easily. And then, as you said in your article, if it was a dog and he was coming and getting food every day, you wouldn't shoot or poison the dog, you would take away the food. And you know, for the Navy is a classic example. You know, every day the baboons know that they can go down and get easy food. And then we're astonished that they go down and get easy food every day. It's bizarre.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder who the more intelligent primate is. But I think the point that you made earlier about we, in a way, think of baboons in human terms is very interesting because the authorities accuse the activists of anthropomorphizing the baboons. Yeah. You know, and the scientists, no, we can't name the baboons, we have to give them numbers and letters, and, you know, that's science. But they still, you know, when it suits them, they still use human-related language to talk about baboons. So they'll talk about a rap sheet for baboons and baboons raiding and that kind of thing.
Case history.
Yeah, so when it suits them, baboons are wild animals, and then when it suits them, baboons are seen in sort of human terms. So there's also, again, this kind of double speak about how we should relate to baboons, about the ethics of baboons, and about the welfare of baboons. And, you know, that's, I think it just goes back to what Ryno is saying, just this lack of appropriate management.
But the thing that's interesting about naming the baboons is that the authorities' way of dealing with the situation, the only thing that they've ever done is put rangers in place, monitors in place. And the men themselves are with these animals every single day of the year, daylight hours. So they build up bonds with the baboons themselves. So a lot of the naming actually doesn't come from the activists, it comes from the men. You know, the one baboon who comes to mind, Carpenter, and I said to the guys, why did you call him Carpenter? And they said, well, he's the baboon who likes to play with the wood. To a resident, that might be very annoying because the wood he may be playing with might be the wooden frame of your house. But the naming didn't come from us. So the only thing the authorities did was put men in place to look after the baboons, and then they get puzzled that the men have developed bonds and care for these animals, recognize their characteristics, and give them names. Most of the baboons have Xhosa names, which I can't get my tongue around. But a lot of the names like George. George was named when he was injured by the people at the Light Industrial Park. And I said, how did you come up with the name George? And they said, well, because it's his name. He's George. So we can't get around the fact that individual animals are named. But the way that they're managed, then, as you said, goes back to we can't have emotional connections.
What is also interesting about that, Jenny, the authorities themselves chose a name for their baboon program, the Urban Baboon Program. They didn't choose the name of the free-roaming natural area baboons, to use an example. They choose Urban Baboon because it's a baboon in the urban area. And the program must address baboons being in the urban area. But their program or management plan is not addressing baboons being in the urban area because they don't implement their mitigation.
Exactly. And if they did implement all of their mitigation strategies and the baboons stayed out of the urban areas, none of us would probably name them or recognize them or have bonds with them because we wouldn't be seeing them. So they work against themselves all the time. And I just don't seem to get to the point of taking their own responsibilities for this. We've got to conclude now. So final thoughts on where this is going to go, and is it too late to be ethical?
Well, it's never too late to be ethical, because once we stop being ethical, we essentially give up on our humanity. So being ethical is as important as much for us as it is for the baboons. So the only hope is that the authorities will recognize the importance of these beautiful animals and realize that they need to start doing what they've been promising to do for the past 25 years. We can only hope.
Yeah, I'm of the view that baboons are more important to us than it's made out to be. I think they deserve protection. I really think that they really deserve implementation of mitigating strategies to keep them safe. And that hasn't taken place to date. The authorities hasn't shown those colours of wanting to protect baboons. Hopefully the future holds that they will implement these mitigating strategies and that these animals will be treated humanely and with the respect that they deserve.
And I think that if the authorities don't read the room, as it were, not just the protest, but the play that was put out recently by Unruly Nature, people are demonstrating very clearly that they do love the baboons and they don't want the baboons gone. And I think if the authorities misread that, I think it's going to be very difficult for them.